The cruiser eased in behind the van at 5:47 in the morning. My three guys were 20 feet away unloading the new compressor unit, and every one of them kept their eyes down. They'd heard the engine. The officer handed me a plain white envelope and waited with the clipboard. I signed. He left without saying much. My name was on the bottom of the subpoena. $180,000 in overbilling on the municipal contract from last spring. The dates matched the work we'd actually done. The numbers didn't. And the way they were wrong wasn't the kind of wrong that happens by accident. I folded the paper and put it in my shirt pocket, told the guys to finish the unload and head to the Mesa job without me. Then I drove to the office, parked in my usual spot, and sat there with the engine off until the sun cleared the roofline. Dan and I started splitting jobs 7 years back because neither of us could handle the bigger municipal bids alone. We kept our own trucks and our own crews, but we shared the paperwork and the city inspector headaches. Most nights we ended up in his garage anyway, working on whatever had broken that week. One Thursday we spent 4 hours pulling the transmission out of his old F-250. Radio on low, both of us covered in grease past the elbow. He kept saying we'd put my boy through the first 2 years of college, with the overtime. We were about to bank on the new hospital wing. I remember laughing at that, telling him the kid still hadn't picked a major. Dan wiped his hands on a rag and said it didn't matter what the major was as long as the check cleared. He said that like it was a promise. I heard it that way too. 6 months after that night, the first padded invoice went through. A man named Greer mentioned a voluntary contribution to keep the permits moving. I paid the first time because the job was half done, and stopping meant laying off 3 men mid-project. After the fourth payment, I stopped asking questions and just signed whatever he slid across the desk. Dan never saw the cash, but he signed the same documents I did. We both knew. Every time I put my name on one of those sheets, I saw my boy's face instead of the invoice. Kept signing anyway. Dan always made sure his signature landed on the second page, never the first. I noticed it early and didn't say anything. Told myself it was just how he organized paperwork. Last year, the numbers on the shared invoices stopped lining up with what we'd actually billed, not by a small margin, by enough that it couldn't be a rounding error. I figured he'd started skimming on his side to cover something of his own. I didn't ask. I moved the company accounts into my name only and stopped copying him on the weekly summaries. That was the first mistake I made after all the original ones. The night I took his hard drive, I used the spare key he'd given me for emergencies. He'd never changed the lock. I found the folder immediately, filed under a date from 14 months earlier. Every fake line item was there, highlighted in yellow, and my name was on every page. His wasn't on a single one. I copied it all to a thumb drive and left the drive on his keyboard with a note that said, "Police by Friday." I drove home checking the rear view mirror the whole way. Every set of headlights that appeared behind me, I held my breath until it turned off. I got home, sat at the kitchen table, and watched the clock move. Never went to bed. 3 days later, I was in Greer's locked file room after midnight. We'd installed the alarm system for that building 2 years earlier. Same model, same default override code because no one ever changes the default. I went through every folder with my company name on it, took every receipt with Greer's initials. On the way out, I dropped the 2 thickest files into the back seat of Dan's truck. He always parked in the same spot at the end of the lot. I told myself it was just evening the field. That's what I told myself. I called Dan and told him to meet me at the old site off the north end of town. 2 in the morning. The concrete forms were still up, half covered with blue tarps that snapped in the wind. I got there first and stood next to my truck with the headlights off. He pulled up 10 minutes later in the same work shirt he'd been wearing all day. When he saw me standing there, he didn't look surprised. He looked like a man who'd been waiting for a specific knock on the door and had finally heard it. "I knew you'd find the folder eventually," he said. I asked him why he never told me what he was doing. "Because your name was already on the first set." He looked at the tarps instead of at me. "Mine wasn't. If I went to the police first, you'd lose the license and the kid's tuition before anyone even looked at Greer." He pulled out a cigarette and held it toward me. "I quit 5 years ago. I took it. I figured if I kept feeding Greer enough new paper," Dan said, "he'd leave the old stuff alone and chase the new stuff instead. Keep both of us in play." He drew on his cigarette. I was wrong about that. The tarp snapped again. Somewhere across the lot, a piece of scrap metal shifted in the wind. You put those files in my truck, he said. It wasn't a question. Yeah. He nodded like he'd expected that answer too. We stood there a while without talking, the kind of quiet that doesn't need filling. What are you going to do? He said. I dropped the cigarette and stepped on it. What I have to. I left him standing there and drove to the station before the sun came up. I handed over only the files that had Greer's name on every page, the complete payment records, the permit hold correspondence, his initials on every cash receipt, enough to make it clean and clear and pointed in one direction. I kept a thumb drive from Dan's hard drive in my jacket pocket the whole time I was inside that building. Walked out with it still there. Then I sat down with the duty sergeant and filled out the voluntary surrender of my contractor license. Wrote a short statement saying the company was closing effective immediately. I kept Dan's name out of every sentence. Walking back to the truck, I tried to think about whether I'd made the right call. I got maybe halfway through the thought before I stopped. That's the kind of question you can spend the rest of your life turning over, and it doesn't get cleaner with handling. My boy's tuition was not going to come out of anything I did from here on out. That part was done. But his name wasn't on any paper the police were holding, and neither was Dan's. And Greer was going to have a very long morning. Some days, that's what passing looks like. My boy was at the yard when I got back. He'd already pulled the last set of gauges from the shelf and loaded the recovery machine into the van. Everything was staged and ready to go the way it always was before a job, except there was no job listed on the board. He didn't ask about the subpoena, didn't ask about the license, didn't ask why the company accounts had changed 3 months ago, or why I'd been driving home by a different route every night for 2 weeks. He just picked up the last case, walked it to the van, and moved over to the driver's seat. I stood at the open doors the same way I had 3 weeks earlier when the cruiser pulled up behind me. Same van, same yard, same angle of early light. Except now the light was coming from the other direction, and I wasn't holding any envelope, and the decision in front of me wasn't mine to make anymore. He waited, engine running, hands on the wheel. I closed the doors from outside and stepped back.